They saw something they couldn't explain, something that defied all logic and reason. These are the shocking stories of ordinary people who witnessed the extraordinary UFO crashes that left an indelible mark on their lives and challenged their understanding of reality. Prepare to be captivated by their first-hand accounts as they recount the chilling details of their encounters with otherworldly objects and beings.
But what is Majestic 12? Well, if you're super into alien conspiracy stuff, you'll have seen them crop up all over the place. Said to be a top secret organization consisting of scientists, military leaders, and government officials who investigate alien spacecraft. Some even say they not only have direct contact with extraterrestrials, but work with them as well. Being given access to their technology, in exchange they cover up the aliens' presence on Earth while allowing them to study us. But that's a more outlandish version of the conspiracy. At the core though, they're said to at least have knowledge of aliens, and maybe even work on reverse engineering their technology, doing alien autopsies on extraterrestrials that have crash landed on Earth, that sort of thing. This is basically what Bob Lazar was claiming to have seen while working at Area 51. He could start to see how much Majestic 12, or MJ-12 as they're often called, are really at the core of almost every United States government alien conspiracy. The JFK assassination is often described as the mother of all conspiracies, and yes, with just a little digging, you'll find that MJ-12 is mentioned here too. Some people believe that Kennedy found out about MJ-12 and the secret dealings they had with aliens. Supposedly, he wanted to reveal the truth to the American public, thinking they had a right to know. This of course didn't sit well with MJ-12, who were determined to keep everything under wraps. On top of that, or maybe alternatively, depending on who you talk to, Kennedy was sticking his nose where MJ-12 didn't want him to, trying to have the US and the Soviets work together, but this would mean sharing sensitive information with them about UFOs, and MJ-12 didn't want that. One piece of evidence that fueled this theory is a document called the Burned Memo. This document surfaced in the 90s, and it's said to be a memo from an MJ-12 member ordering someone to essentially terminate Kennedy, using coded language of course. The memo mentions Lancer, which was Kennedy's Secret Service code name. Now another part of the theory involves a speech Kennedy gave at the United Nations in 1963, where he talked about the need for cooperation between the US and the Soviet Union, even suggesting they should work together in space exploration. So some believe this was a veiled reference that he was making for his desire to share UFO secrets with the world. There's also a memo that Kennedy sent to the CIA asking for a review of UFO files. He wanted to be debriefed on the unknowns, as he referred to them as in the memo. And what's very eerie is that this memo was dated just 10 days before he was killed. So, did MJ-12 see him as a threat to their secrecy and decided they needed to dispose of him?
Coming in at number 10 is Antonio Villas-Boas. On the night of October 16th, 1957, Antonio Villas-Boas was plowing fields when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky that approached him, growing in size. The craft began descending to land in the field, and he decided to leave on his tractor, but its lights and engine died, so he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 5-foot-tall humanoid who was wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue, and instead of speech it made noises like barks or yelps. 3 similar beings then joined and dragged him inside their aircraft. Once inside the craft, Antonio said he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led to a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. They then took blood from him and took him to a third room where some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made him violently ill. Shortly after this, Antonio was joined in the room by another humanoid. This one, however, was female, very attractive. Antonio was then given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When he returned home, he discovered that only 4 hours had passed. Now, did he help create one of the first alien-human hybrids? I think so. Number 9, Elizabeth Clarer. Elizabeth Clarer was a South African woman who, starting in 1956, publicly claimed to have been contacted by aliens multiple times between 1954 and 1963. Her first visitation supposedly occurred when she was just 7 years old, and she was one of the first women to claim relationship with an extraterrestrial. She promoted an idea of a better world and beliefs in a cosmic consciousness. In her book Beyond the Light Barrier, she strived to convey a message of peace, love, understanding, and environmentalism, which she credited to the superior wisdom of an advanced and immaculately utopian Venusian civilization. She also ended up promoting conspiracy theories of an international cover-up that kept vital information from the public and claimed to have been threatened with abduction to press her to revealing details about alien technology. Number 8. Terrell Copeland. The Virginia pilot Terrell Copeland claimed that he was abducted by aliens, particularly because he was a Marine. Terrell claimed that his first experience with aliens occurred in 2007 when he captured footage of what he believed to be a UFO on his cell phone from his apartment in Suffolk, Virginia. It was an orb of light, just a big ball of light. It wasn't moving, it was solid white. The other was directly across the street from it, up 300 feet above the ground, and was changing colors very rapidly, he said. He alleged that it wasn't until after he published the footage online that things truly became strange. I woke up from a nap by the sound of someone trying to enter my apartment, and I said, "Who is it?" There was no answer. You could see the doorknob moving and scratching at the door. The firearm, it was on my table, and my thought was to get up and check. Despite the urge to get up, Terrell was paralyzed and only able to move his eyes. Suddenly, he heard a voice through the door tell him, "You don't need that weapon, we won't harm." He then began to experience missing hours as well, and he was incapable of accounting for 4 waking hours during a span of 2 nights. I was in a room and I saw a woman who did not have complete human features. She had the typical black eyes that you hear about, she had an elongated skull, and that startled me. The next memory I have is me standing on my balcony waving at this cylinder-shaped ship, he said. Number 7. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. The Pescalua abduction was an UFO sighting and alien abduction in 1973, in which Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker claimed they were abducted by aliens while fishing in Mississippi. On the evening of October 11, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that they were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the river when they heard a whirling whiz sound, saw 2 flashing blue lights, and observed an oval-shaped object 30 to 40 feet across 8 to 10 feet high. They claimed that they were conscious but paralyzed, while 3 creatures with robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers took them aboard the object and subjected them to an examination. Number 6. Thomas Reed. On September 1st, 1969, Thomas Reed and his family in Berkshire County, Massachusetts saw a UFO. In the car with his mother, brother, and grandmother that night, the family noticed a group of glowing orbs dash out of the roadside trees. It came to a stop off the right side of the road, Thomas said. Everything got really calm. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane. It was just like dead silent. Then there was an eruption of crickets and frogs, and it got really loud, and that was it. Then the family suddenly found itself back in the car, but they had inexplicably lost 2 hours of memory. Stranger still, Thomas's mother and grandmother had somehow switched car seats. He said over time the family regained some memory of the incident, including having been to a hangar-like facility with other people. We encountered something, it was definitely not of this world. The hangar thing we were in was huge, it was larger than a football field. The hallway we had seen was circular with a Y configuration, almost to control the flow of traffic, and this one room had a bowed-in wall that was round, he said.
Here's what the FBI doesn't want you to know, but what we're gonna tell you anyways.
Now, if you know anything about UFOs, you know about the Roswell incident that took place on a farm in Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947. But if you don't, here's the quick notes. In 1947, a UFO crash landed on Mac Brazel's farm. He didn't think much of it until UFO reports started coming out in the local newspaper. Brazel notified local authorities, the Air Force got involved, the crashed object was taken to Area 51, and the whole thing was written off as a crashed weather balloon, despite Brazel and military personnel claiming otherwise. Well, did you know that from 1947 to 2018, the crash site was a designated no-go zone? That's right, the entire area was closed off to the public for an entire 71 years, likely so the government could cover all their bases in ensuring that the public would never know the true nature of the crash. In 2018, the site was finally reopened to the public, but unfortunately, at this point, all evidence of what was most definitely an alien spaceship — you don't close off an area for 71 years because of a crashed weather balloon — is now long gone.
The Kecksburg UFO case has to be one of the strangest UFO cases in history. On December 9th, 1965, people in 6 US states, as well as parts of Canada, reported spotting a fireball streak across the sky over Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. Then folks in the small village of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, claimed to see something crash into the woods after seeing wisps of blue smoke and feeling vibrations. Authorities cordoned off the area and searched the forest, later claiming to find nothing and saying the object was likely just a meteor. But that didn't line up with what a number of witnesses had seen. People who did manage to get close to the crash site described seeing a large acorn-shaped object partially buried in the ground. It was about the size of a small car and had strange markings that almost looked like hieroglyphics. But they didn't get a very long look before the military stepped in. So what exactly was this object? Was it a Soviet satellite? A piece of top-secret military equipment? Was it not from Earth at all? This case is nowhere near as famous as something like Roswell, but it has come up on shows like Unsolved Mysteries, and UFO investigators still reference it to this day. But the truth as to what really crashed into the forest is still undisclosed.
Earlier this year, documents were declassified by United States Homeland Security outlining a secret project designated to identifying, acquiring, studying, and reverse engineering AAVs, aka Advanced Aerospace Vehicles. According to the Pentagon, the project never actually went ahead due to the fact that the government was unable to collect any kind of otherworldly spacecrafts. Sure. The document showed that the budget for the program was to be 12 to 15 million in the first year, 25 million in the second, and upwards of 50 million US dollars in the third. And the purpose of the project was to ensure national security by accessing and assessing the advanced technology and determining its threat capabilities. Furthermore, the document stated that another drive for the program was the United States' fear that either China or Russia had possibly already been able to reverse engineer these kind of technologies. Despite all of the information released to the public meticulously outlining the project, Homeland Security stands firm on their claim that the program never actually went ahead because it was never actually approved. Personally, I'm not buying it. It sounds more like a foreign enemy was getting too close to uncovering the mission, and so the government released a bogus declassified statement saying that while there was a project, it never actually went ahead, in order to throw them off the scent. If you agree, consider giving this video a thumbs up. Why not, you guys?
Project Sign. Project Sign was an early US military investigation into unidentified flying objects launched in 1948 after a surge in reported sightings. Everything really kicked off with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, followed by the Roswell incident, and then people were spotting UFOs all over the country. So it was time to investigate these reports and assess whether there was a real threat to national security, especially being that it was the Cold War, of course. The team included experts in astronomy, physics, and psychology, all tasked with analyzing UFO reports and data. Sign was a top secret for most of its operation, but in 1949 some of their findings went public and it was pretty intriguing. Basically, they concluded that a small percentage of UFO sightings couldn't be easily explained away by natural phenomena or known aircraft. So this led some members to hypothesize that UFOs might be of extraterrestrial origin. But right around this time, the project was shut down by General Hoyt Vandenberg, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. It was then replaced by Project Grudge, with a slightly different goal, but more on that in a bit. First, let's kick it over to Project Blue Book was an official investigation conducted by the United States Air Force from March of 1952 to December of 1969. It stemmed from similar projects, Sign and Project Grudge, but when Air Force generals leading those projects started getting fed up with how poorly UFO investigations were going, they wanted something more serious, and so Project Blue Book was born. Its main goal was to look into and analyze reports of unidentified flying objects to see if they posed any real threat to national security. This project came about during a time when UFO sightings were starting to become a lot more frequent, and people were genuinely scared at the time. I think today most people find the idea of spotting genuine UFOs and aliens kind of exciting, but the concept of aliens was relatively new at the time, or newer, and fear seemed to be the general vibe. Just Just look at all the alien invasion movies like War of the Worlds coming out at the time. The USAF decided to take a systematic approach to studying these sightings, attempting to separate reports that could be chalked up to natural phenomena from the cases that had no solid explanation. Project Blue Book collected over 12,000 reports of UFO sightings during its operation. The team working on it included scientists, military personnel, and other experts. By the time the project ended, most of the cases were explained, but a small percentage did remain unidentified. Cases that Project Blue Book investigated, and their findings are cited in discussions about government secrecy when it comes to UFOs to this day.
Number 10. Flashing lights in China. I mean, if you see some flashing lights floating around anywhere in China, it might be a UFO, or the air might be exploding because the pollutant levels are so high. I had a buddy who was living in Beijing, and he said every morning when he would wake up, he would blow his nose and it would be black. That is disgusting. That can't be good for your life expectancy. Well, exploding air or not, these orbs are definitely not a normal occurrence. They were spotted all over the country at different times of day over the course of a single day. They look sort of like the exhaust port on a camouflaged alien ship. It's absolutely nuts. In typical UFO fashion, they're just floating around in the sky. I would assume that if they are aliens, they came here for some sort of surveillance. Maybe they think we're cute like dogs, and they just come around, take a bunch of pictures, and they're like, oh my god, look at them, they have their own transportation and healthcare systems, they're adorable. Number 9. English UFO sighting. Next we head to jolly old England, where there's flying saucers in the sky, and if the internet is right, there's lizard people in the monarchy. This footage was caught right off the M5 highway, and it's pretty convincing. We can see what looks like classic flying saucers hovering above the ground. But who knows if this is actually something flying up in the sky or just an optical illusion. Maybe someone just did the most insane frisbee throw of all time, and now that thing is just hovering like your girlfriend waiting to steal your fries. But then we see a military fighter jet pass by the object. I don't know about you, but I don't think the military spends millions to take its fighter jets off the ground to look at Riley's epic frisbee launch. And these two fighter jets pass not once, but twice, and then we can see the object do some sort of spin in the sky. Even though this whole thing was caught on camera and the military clearly got involved, when questioned on the matter, the British military had no comment. Come on guys, just give us a little juice. Number 8. Dancing lights. We got some footage that isn't a UFO, but it's definitely something that I've never seen before floating around in the sky. It looks like pure energy that's just balled up and pirouetting through the clouds. I guess it could be some sort of static energy buildup up there in the sky that's just kind of on the loose, and frankly I'm not smart enough to know whether that is or is not possible. But it does seem to move in a controlled motion. It kind of swims up and down, and out of all the UFO videos I've watched, I gotta say this one is the prettiest. I don't think we're gonna make a list of the most stunning unidentified flying objects, but if we did, this would definitely be high on the list. I bet if you could contain this thing like something you could sell to rich people, it would take the place of chandeliers. This one was also spotted in the UK. It seems like there's something going on over there. Unlike our last video, the military doesn't swoop in and take a closer look. There's some people on the internet who claim this video to be a fake. And if you're out there making fake UFO videos, get a better hobby, man. You're clogging up all the authentic UFO footage. Number 7. Splash zone. Imagine you're a good, God-fearing fisherman in Spain, and then you see some crazy thing flying through the sky, and it makes you question God and everything you ever trusted. This footage is crazy. It was taken in Spain off the coast of the Galicia region, and it shows some sort of UFO blast over a fisherman's boat out in the middle of the ocean, and then boom! The whole thing plunges underwater. This is absolutely insane. You see a massive splash from the aircraft entering the water. The speculation around this is that there is secret underwater alien bases. Like, duh, that's why we know more about the moon than we do about the ocean floor, because the government is hiding all the cool aliens down there and they don't want us to hang out with them. I mean, it would be the best place to hide them. Unless you've got a state-of-the-art submarine, which is super hard to get on Craigslist, there's no way you're gonna find anything. Number 6. Fire in the sky. Remember that list I made up of top 10 most stunning unidentified flying objects? Well, this one would definitely be on the list too. This thing looks super cool. It makes it look like there's a fire in the sky. Now I couldn't dig up that much information on this, and I mean this is grainy cell phone camera footage of what might be an alien spacecraft, so whatever I dig up off the internet is just probably an educated guess like my own. But it seems like this UFO could be doing one of three things. It could be doing some sort of repairs. Maybe it entered our airspace because it was a safe place to stop and do a little pit stop checkup. The ship could also be doing the opposite, on its way down for a crash landing. Or 3, it could possibly be dumping something. As you watch through the footage, it almost looks like a crop duster leaving a trail behind. I'm sure whatever an alien spaceship is dusting our planet with is harmless, don't worry about it. Number 5, Boy Scouts. You're just trying to be a good Boy Scout and learn a bunch of stuff about the Catalina Channel, and then nearly 100 UFOs appear out of nowhere and your Scoutmaster is too busy looking at them instead of teaching you about how to tie new knots or whatever Boy Scouts do, I don't really know. Well, this happened to Alan Bergholt in 2013. He saw the sky light up with UFOs and then they started diving into the Catalina Channel, which further reinforces the possibility of the underwater UFO theory. We've been looking for UFOs in space and they've been right under our noses this whole time. Number 4, surprise. Holy, this one is probably one of the best pieces of UFO footage I have ever seen, and we're only on number 4. This was caught on some CCTV footage in Australia. It's just some regular old lightning, just some regular old clouds, and then out of nowhere there's a goddamn spaceship in the goddamn clouds. Are you seeing this? I bet they thought they were being sneaky with their little camouflage in the clouds. I bet the captain of the spaceship was pissed at the guy who's in charge of parking the ship. Like, what the hell, Jeff? You parked next to a thunderstorm. They can see us. We're supposed to blend in. Number 3, military footage. This is the best kind of stuff to find on the old interweb. When you get legit military footage of stuff going down, it makes it so much more real. This was shot on January 12th in 2007. 2 fighter pilots report seeing something that looks like a floating rock just hanging out around 17,000 feet. A super casual thing for a rock to do. They keep trying to get close so they can get a better look, but every time they would get too close, it would disappear and then reappear somewhere else, like it was using some sort of short-range teleportation. It did this a couple times before it completely vanished. What was this thing? Well, either a flying rock or something much more advanced. If these aliens are actually real, then why don't they just come down and hang out? Tell us about space and stuff and then come try out churros. We've got so many churros. Number 2, space disc. Space disc does sound like some sort of futuristic sport thought up in the 90s, but we're talking about an actual flying saucer seen in space. This footage was caught off a satellite and you can see some sort of saucer slash disc slash casserole frying pan flying off Earth and then disappearing into the black void. This one looks massive, like super huge. It's hard to tell because there's obviously not a lot you can use for perspective to see how big this floating space thing is, but I'm gonna take a guess that this is the biggest one we've had on the list so far. I'm wondering if that means bigger aliens, like a bunch of Shaquille O'Neals running around a spaceship turning knobs and dials saying bleep bloop and wearing jumpsuits. That's how I picture aliens, in case anyone's wondering. Number 1, everything is bigger in Texas. Yeah, everything is bigger in Texas, even the UFO sightings. This one comes from Stevensville in the Lone Star State, and it's a recorded UFO sighting from 2008. This is where an entire town saw an alien formation that was over a mile long and was moving in perfect formation. It was hundreds of spacecrafts. An Air Force pilot who saw this insane happening said that these ships were moving at speeds of up to 3,000 miles per hour and never broke their perfect parallel lines. The Air Force tried to say that they were doing some formation practice with 10 fighter jets that night, but the people were like, nah dude, we saw hundreds of spacecrafts. None of them looked like a 1016 fighter jet. This is like when you find out the truth about Christmas and your parents are like, no, Santa did it. Just tell me the truth, dude. I may look stupid, but I'm only a little stupid.
Project Blue Book had a very specific classification system. which was used to organize and analyze the thousands of UFO reports that the US Air Force was receiving. The system was important to help make sense of the data and determine which cases deserved some deeper investigation. The sightings were categorized into three main groups: identified, insufficient information, and unidentified. The identified category is pretty self-explanatory. These were sightings that could be easily explained. They usually turned out to be misidentified aircraft, weather balloons, other natural phenomena like lightning. The insufficient information category included cases where there wasn't enough data to make a solid judgment. Reports like this were sometimes incomplete or just lacking in detail, making it tough for them to draw any solid conclusions. And then you have the exciting category: unidentified. These were for cases that couldn't be explained. They made up a small percentage of the total reports, but that's not really surprising. People didn't know as much about what went on up in the sky then, and with the UFO craze at its peak, people were making a lot of reports that we'd probably never bother making today. Project Blue Book was first headed by United States Air Force officer Edward James Ruppelt. If Project Blue Book was a TV show, this first season was the best. Ruppelt seemed to have a genuine interest in actually uncovering the truth behind these UFO reports. Ruppelt was an experienced airman and had served in World War II. He was also responsible for coining the term unidentified flying object. Before that, they were just known as flying saucers. He'd made a lot of changes to how UFO reports were handled. He set out to reduce the stigma that often came with reporting a UFO, creating a standard questionnaire for UFO witnesses. This would also help gather data that could be analyzed statistically. Ruppelt took his job very seriously and expected the same from his team. He avoided speculation and made sure his staff didn't lean too heavily towards any single theory about UFOs. If anyone was too skeptical or too convinced, they were off the project. He also went to scientists for advice, issued regular press releases, and kept the military up to date with monthly reports. Some of the biggest cases during Ruppelt's time included the Lubbock Lights and a 1952 radar visual sighting over Washington, D.C. The scientific consultant for Blue Book was an astronomer named J. Allen Hynek. He'd been skeptical about the project at first, but he started to become more open to the idea of UFOs as he encountered more and more reports. More on him later. Ruppelt left Project Blue Book in February of 1953 for a temporary reassignment. When he returned, though, he found his team had been cut down significantly. He ended up losing faith in the project and left. His time with Project Blue Book is remembered as the last serious attempt by the Air Force to genuinely analyze UFO phenomena. 1953 is where things really started to go downhill, and a lot of that is thanks to the Robertson Panel. UFO sightings were on the rise, especially around Washington, D.C., so this led to a lot of attention and concern. So the CIA decided to set up a panel of scientists to look into it. This group, called the Robertson Panel, was led by H.P. Robertson, a physicist from the California Institute of Technology. The panel included physicists, meteorologists, engineers, and one astronomer, J. Allen Hynek. The Robertson Panel first met on January 14th of 1953. They wanted to figure out how to handle the growing public interest in UFOs. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, Hynek, and others presented the best evidence they'd gathered. After 12 hours of reviewing 6 years worth of data, the panel concluded that most UFO sightings had simple explanations, and all could be explained with more investigation, which they didn't think was worth the effort. The panel believed that these unverifiable UFO reports were just clogging things up, risking the chance of missing a real threat to the United States. So they recommended that the Air Force downplay the importance of UFOs and start a full-on debunking campaign. They suggested using mass media, even getting Disney involved, and enlisting celebrities to treat the subject like a joke in order to make the whole subject seem less serious and interesting to the public. Then in December of '53, a regulation was put in place, making it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized people. So this panel right here really shaped how UFOs and alien reports would be dealt with in the years to come. In March of 1954, Captain Charles Hardin took over Project Blue Book, and he basically treated his whole time there as a lunch break. He had very little interest in UFOs and was pretty hands-off. The previous head of the project, Edward James Ruppelt, really wasn't a fan of this guy, writing that Hardin, quote, thinks that anyone who is even interested in UFOs is crazy. They bore him. During this time, the number of reports deemed unidentified had dropped to less than 1%. During the Ruppelt era, this category made up about 20 to 25% of all reports. The debunking campaign was clearly in full effect here. Captain Hardin was mostly just disinterested in the whole thing, but Captain Gregory, who came next, he was even worse, in that he was actively setting out to downplay and discredit pretty much every UFO report he came across. Captain George T. Gregory took over Project Blue Book in 1956. They now wanted as few unidentified reports as possible, so they changed how they classified these sightings. Gregory's approach to this was pretty straightforward. He reclassified many of the UFO sightings to make them fit with more conventional explanations. For example, if a sighting was labeled as a possible comet, it was bumped up to a probable comet. And if a sighting had been previously labeled as a probable comet, well, that just became a definite 100% misidentified comet. This same method applied to other sightings, like balloons. If someone reported seeing a strange balloon-like object, Blue Book would just call it a balloon without doing much, if any, research. This tactic became standard practice into the later years of Blue Book. This wasn't cool. Even the scientific consultant for Blue Book, J. Allen Hynek, who I mentioned before, a guy that had been such a hard skeptic at first, even he thought this was wrong. Everything was looking pretty bleak. It seemed like Project Blue Book had jumped the shark, ratings were down, the show was on the verge of being cancelled. But then a new star of the show came along. Lieutenant Colonel Robert J. Friend took over Project Blue Book in 1958. Unlike Gregory, Friend tried to change things up and steer Blue Book back toward serious UFO investigations, but he faced a lot of challenges. There was a serious lack of funding and support. The higher-ups still wanted these things to be downplayed. But Hynek saw Friend as a breath of fresh air and rallied behind him. He organized a meeting in 1959 between Blue Book staff and personnel from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, or the ATIC. Or do people say attic? I imagine they say attic, but who knows? You tell me. Hynek figured it was time to reevaluate some older UFO reports, but these plans didn't go very far. During Friend's time, there were talks about moving Blue Book to another Air Force agency, but no one else wanted to take it on. In 1960, the US Congress held hearings about UFOs. The civilian UFO research group NICAP accused Blue Book of covering up UFO evidence and gained some allies in Congress. Because of this, Blue Book was investigated by Congress and the CIA, with folks saying they hadn't been doing what they were supposed to be doing, genuine scientific studies. Some more personnel were added, and Blue Book's budget was increased. Things looked like they were on the up and up, but it seemed like it had all been for show. By the time Friend left Blue Book in 1963, he'd become very disillusioned with the project. He figured it had become ineffective and should be dissolved. He tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it didn't even matter. He couldn't turn Project Blue Book into what it was in the glory days of Edward Ruppelt. After that, Major Hector Quintanilla took over and ran the whole project straight into the ground, fully embracing the debunking campaign that had been plaguing the project for years. Now, of course, there are endless conspiracies surrounding Project Blue Book and the project's handling of UFO cases, especially for the post-Ruppelt era, where the leaders seemed to be less open to the possibility of UFOs on the surface. Were they genuinely dismissive, or were they hiding things? A lot of people who are into UFOs, or just skeptical folks in general, think that Project Blue Book dismissed credible UFO reports without proper investigation, and that they were trying to debunk rather than seriously study the possibility of UFO phenomena and aliens. When Project Blue Book ended in 1969, the Air Force made several statements about their findings over the years. They claimed that most UFO sightings could be explained by identifiable objects or natural phenomena. This included everything from weather balloons and aircraft to stars and clouds. They stated that these objects objects posed no threat to national security, and that there was no evidence suggesting that any sightings were related to extraterrestrial beings or advanced technology beyond what was known at the time. Basically, their final report downplayed the possibility of UFOs being anything extraordinary. But as I said, not everyone was convinced, and there have been conspiracies ever since. So much of the discussions around government cover-ups when it comes to aliens and UFOs comes from Project Blue Book. Some former military personnel and insiders have come forward over the years, claiming that there were cases of more detailed investigations and findings that were never made public. But why did Project Blue Book, especially in the later years, seem to have this agenda of dismissing the idea of extraterrestrials and downplaying credible reports? Well, aside from that whole clogging up the pipes thing that I mentioned earlier, most people will say it was to avoid panic in the public. Maybe the government thought and still think that we're just not ready to hear that there really are little green alien folk flying around our planet. Maybe the government is actually working with them, and to avoid public outrage, they're keeping it quiet. But there's another possibility that's a lot more depressing, so why don't we finish off with that? Some argue that Project Blue Book and projects similar to it that have followed in its footsteps are really just smokescreens designed to give the appearance of transparency while actually diverting our attention away from darker government activity. This is the thing none of us really want to believe. It's a lot less fun, but it is possible. As for what they could be hiding, you name it. Everything from testing of dangerous weapons to more conspiratorial stuff like weather control. There are all kinds of possibilities, and none of them are all that pleasant. But I like to think that there are aliens visiting Earth, that we're on the verge of an exciting new chapter in history. Hey, one can dream, right?
A joint effort between the National Security Agency of the United States, aka the NSA, and the British intelligence agencies dedicated to training super soldiers in charge of UFO retrieval and security lockdown operations. I have to say, my interest is piqued. Project Mannequin, as it's called, was revealed to the public back in the 2000s by several whistleblowers who claim to have been a part of the project at one point or another. Now, while super soldiers in charge of subduing alien threats does sound pretty cool, unfortunately the recruitment process sounds pretty dark. Apparently agents don't just join the team of their own accord, instead hand over their offspring to the government at a young age for some kind of crazy undisclosed amount of money. According to whistleblower reports, the base for Project Mannequin is located in a top secret facility 60 meters underground in Berkshire in southern England, and this is where the soldiers are trained to become some of the most skilled individuals in the world. Now, because I already know you're going to ask, the most famous whistleblower of Project Mannequin was Max Spears, who, after leaking information regarding the project to the public, died under incredibly strange and inexplicable circumstances. Inexplicable as in one moment he sat down on his couch and the very next moment he was dead, and to this day no one knows how it happened, but he believed prior to his death that he was a sleeper agent that had been brainwashed by the government and was involuntarily part of this project, so who knows?
In 1949, Project Sign was replaced with Project Grudge. But now things were different. Their goal wasn't just to assess UFO reports and figure out if they were legitimate. Instead, the purpose was to downplay the presence of UFOs. At the time, the US government was worried that foreign governments could exploit UFO reports, basically causing panic in the public. So Grudge shifted its focus from scientific investigation to straight up debunking UFO reports and reassuring the public that there was nothing extraordinary about the sightings, even when there actually was. J. Allen Hynek, a famous American astronomer, professor, and UFOologist, took issue with Grudge, claiming that it was, quote, less science and more of a public relations campaign, which it was, at least on the surface. Just because they were telling the public UFO sightings were nothing more than balloons, meteors, or optical illusions doesn't mean they were doing research behind the scenes that they felt it best to cover up.
Project Moondust is officially described as a United States project dedicated to recovering the remains of Soviet satellites that re-entered the atmosphere and crashed down to Earth in not only the US but also South Africa, Bolivia, and even the Himalayan mountains. Unofficially, it is possible that the project is actually dedicated to something far more interesting. You know where I'm going with this. The collection and analysis of crashed UFOs. It is believed that while the US claimed to have been recovering satellites, project, they were actually collecting UFOs, which were then sent out to various military bases throughout the states. The entire thing was revealed by a man named Clifford Stone, who claimed to have been part of the project. Just before his death, he was quoted saying that the entire time the project was going on, they were telling the American public that it had nothing to do with aliens, when in reality, high clearance personnel who were not army officials would always be added to the mission last minute, and they would be the ones to claim ownership of whatever objects were recovered during the mission. These objects were then sent out for testing, analysis, and reverse engineering.
Project Magnet was Canada's government investigation into UFOs. It was launched in December of 1950 by Wilbert B. Smith, a senior radio engineer with the Canadian Department of Transport. Smith had a personal interest in UFOs and believed that they could be scientifically studied. So the main goal of the project was to attempt to figure out what these UFOs were, and if it was possible, they could be using Earth's magnetic field as a source of propulsion. The project involved setting up monitoring stations across Canada equipped with specialized equipment to detect and analyze magnetic and radio frequency disturbances. Smith hoped that by capturing data from these disturbances, they could find patterns and similarities with UFO sightings. Now, Wilbert Brockhouse Smith was an interesting guy. He did believe that UFOs were of extraterrestrial origin and had psychic abilities. He also believed that aliens were communicating to him through the use of telepathy.
Unbeknownst to some, the United States is not the only one with an Area 51 style top secret UFO alien base. That's right, Russia has their very own version of the not so secret alien bunker located in rural Siberia and referred to as Kapustin Yar. It makes sense. I mean, Russia was the first country to send a living being up to space back in 1957, so it's only natural that they would have some kind of corner on the market of UFO and alien artifacts. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the first living being in space was a dog named Laika, who unfortunately did not make it back down to Earth, but that's a sad, sad story for another day. While some of the non-believers might claim that Kapustin Yar is nothing more than a regular military base used for radar systems, satellite tracking, and low-level nuclear weapons testing, it should be noted that the Russian government didn't even acknowledge the base's existence until 1983, and furthermore, many former employees have claimed that while working on the base, they witnessed not only the reverse engineering of alien spacecrafts, but actual alien autopsies as well. And personally, I feel like this whole nuclear weapons testing thing has become such a popular way for secret military bases to keep people from getting too close. I mean, really, name a better deterrent than radiation poisoning. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to know if aliens exist as much as the next guy, but nothing is worth that. It's awful. Don't Google it.
Antarctica, yes, all of it. Antarctica has gained quite a reputation for being a hotspot for UFO sightings and theories about secret government bases dedicated to studying them. It's remote, inhospitable, makes for an ideal cover for secretive activities. Nobody really wants to go to Antarctica. It's desolate, the weather sucks. So not only would most people veer clear of it anyway, but makes it very difficult for ordinary people to access, allowing secretive operations to take place in secrecy. Some conspiracy theorists have pointed out images with unusual formations in the ice taken with satellites, which some people think could be entrances to underground military facilities and stuff like that. Some even believe there are pyramid-type structures there buried under the ice that might have been built by some ancient civilization, possibly with the help of extraterrestrials or just built by aliens entirely. The governments of the world, especially the United States and Russia, are said to have established secret research facilities in Antarctica to study alien technology and artifacts.
A top secret outpost located in the small town of Dulce, New Mexico, was apparently erected in the 1900s to monitor alien communication signals as well as other weird happenings that tend to come with the territory. According to locals living in the town, which has a population of about 2,700 people and not one single traffic light, alien signals were first intercepted in 1979. The following year, something strange happened. The bodies of dead animals began turning up all over town, mutilated in ways that one could not or would not want to explain. I will not be explaining, because this is YouTube, not the dark web. In the years that followed, individuals who claimed to have been associated with the base, nicknamed the Dulce Alien Center, started coming forward. One man claimed to have helped build the facility and to even have witnessed a full-on battle between humans and alien beings. After that, UFO sightings in the town skyrocketed, probably because people now knew what to look for. Fast forward to today, and reports of UFO sightings are still pretty common in the small town of Dulce, as well as reports of top secret military projects, despite the fact that the government insists it has a total of 0 bases in the area. But who's buying that?
Majestic 12, often referred to simply as MJ12, is at the heart of pretty much everything we've talked about on this list. The organization is basically the king of government alien cover-up conspiracies. The story goes that in 1947, following the Roswell incident, where a supposed UFO crash occurred, President Truman established Majestic 12 as a secret committee of scientists, military leaders, and government officials whose mission was to investigate and cover up evidence of extraterrestrials. According to conspiracy theorists, MJ12's members included figures from the military, the scientific community, who would manage recovered alien technology, study it, possibly even operate on aliens. Documents about MJ12 allegedly leaked in 1985. UFOologists William Moore and Stanton Friedman claimed they'd been pointed to them by an anonymous whistleblower. One of the most disturbing chapters in the lore of MJ12, though, is their possible involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Why? In order to prevent him from disclosing classified information about UFOs and aliens. We have a whole video on MJ12, so check that one out after this one.
Since the Roswell incident, New Mexico has been a hot spot for UFO sightings. UFO crashes, however, are far less common, but they still do happen, no matter how much the FBI and the Pentagon wants us to think they don't. Luckily, free speech is still more or less a thing. Or we probably never would have heard of the March 25th, 1948 UFO crash at Hart Canyon Hiking Trail, in which a spacecraft of unknown origins crashed into the mesa and was promptly recovered and covered up by the United States Air Force and 5th Army Division. According to a plaque located at the site, the recovery operation took a total of 2 weeks to complete, and all materials taken from the site were brought to the Los Alamos Laboratory for scientific study and evaluation. According to eyewitness reports, the spacecraft was approximately 100 feet in diameter and 18 feet tall. And according to insiders, it had been transporting as many as 16 extraterrestrials who, unfortunately, all died on impact.
In the spring of 1941, 6 years before the infamous Roswell incident, something crashed just outside Cape Girardeau, Missouri. A local Reverend William Huffman had been called to perform last rites at the site, and when he arrived, he was shocked to see a strange metallic saucer-shaped object. Around it were small bodies, and the bodies didn't look human. He claimed the bodies were about 4 feet tall, with large heads and eyes and thin limbs. The military quickly took control, removing the wreckage and the bodies, and the incident was hushed up. The story remained mostly a family secret until years later, when Huffman's granddaughter, Charlotte Mann, recounted what her grandmother had told her. According to Mann, her grandfather also saw strange hieroglyphic-like symbols inside of this craft, similar to those described in other UFO crash stories. No official documents confirming the crash have ever been released, but some say this is just another example of a successful government cover-up.
While Ohio's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is not believed to be a secret crash site, many people do claim that it is a place where crashed UFOs are taken to be studied and reverse engineered. Specifically in Hangar 18, the legendary alien warehouse located on the base, where many UFO enthusiasts believe the government hides flying saucer debris, the remains of extraterrestrials, and even live aliens. Speculation of the base began after the Roswell incident in 1947, and it has continued to this day, with many people claiming that reliable sources have confirmed its existence, i.e. former military personnel. One such man was a military pilot named Oliver Henderson, who allegedly told his wife that while working for the base he was required to fly a plane filled with UFO debris and several small alien bodies from Roswell to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Another former pilot, Marion Black Mac McGruger, claimed that scientists at the base conducted experiments on a live extraterrestrial being and ended up killing it. Many other experiments are said to have been carried carried out at the base as well, although according to the FBI, the Pentagon, and the government, it's just a regular Air Force base where everything is completely above board.
On May 21st, 1953, there were a number of reports that a UFO crashed in the desert near Kingman, Arizona, and that the military had quickly swooped in to cover it up. Arthur Stansel, a mechanical engineer working for the Air Force at the time, claimed that he was part of a team that was rushed to the crash site to investigate and recover the debris. He described seeing a small disc-shaped craft partially buried in the ground. It was made of a shiny metallic material, and there were no visible seams or rivets, which made it look like it was molded from a single piece of metal. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, and he also claimed to have seen the body of a creature being held in a tent next to the crashed aircraft, stating he saw, quote, the dead body of a 4-foot human-like creature in a silver metallic suit. The skin on its face was dark brown. And of course, this was all covered up, with the material being loaded onto trucks and transported to an undisclosed location.
I have to say, I love a good whistleblower moment, especially when the whistleblowing is being done by military veterans in open court, and it's regarding the evidence of little green men. What a time to be alive. In July of 2023, 3 military veterans testified in a Congress hearing about UFOs and claimed that the United States government had been operating a secret UFO reverse engineering program for at least the past few decades. Claims were also made that the United States did in fact recover non-human biologics from certain alleged crash sites. Of course, the veterans were unable to go into extensive detail about the missions and operations that led to the discoveries and projects involving UFOs because they are obviously classified. But the simple act of the 3 men, Ryan Graves, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace, David Grush, retired Air Force Major, and David Fravor, retired Navy Commander, openly admitting to the existence of both UFOs, alien life forms, and secret government programs regarding the two in open court, it's pretty huge.
On November 9th of 1974 in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, 3 teenage boys reported seeing a glowing object streaking across the sky before crashing into a nearby pond. They described the object as round and emitting a strange light, which continued to glow even after it hit the water. People started showing up at the scene, gawking at this mysterious object in the pond, and as word spread, more and more people gathered, and soon local police and fire departments arrived on scene. Witnesses claimed they saw them retrieve a small metallic object, which was then covered and taken away on a truck. Official explanations later claimed that this object was just a railroad lantern that had been thrown into the pond, but some weren't so convinced, and even today people still wonder if something more mysterious had actually plummeted into the water that night.
Prior to 1967, Shag Harbor, located at the southern tip of Nova Scotia, Canada, was a pretty understated fishing village. And then a UFO came to town. On October 4th, around 11:20 p.m., residents of Shag Harbor watched as a mysterious object descended from the sky and crash landed on the water. Witnesses claimed that the craft had 3 to 4 glowing orange lights and that it was about 60 feet in length. After landing in the water, the lights began to dim until eventually all that was left was a yellowish foam, indicating that the craft had either moved too distant to be seen or that it had sunken into the icy waters of Shag Harbor. Authorities searched the area until about 3 a.m., but nothing was ever found, nor has it been to this day. Although it was confirmed that the object was not a civilian or military aircraft, all of those had been accounted for. The day after the incident, the Rescue Coordination Center filed a report with Canadian Forces headquarters claiming that something had in fact touched down in the waters of Shag Harbor and that it was of unknown origin. As I said, to this day, the object has yet to be recovered. Maybe we'll get lucky this year.
On April 18, 1962, people across multiple states witnessed something flying through the sky, which eventually crashed near the Nellis Air Force Base outside Las Vegas. The object was tracked by NORAD, which made its way across 10 US states. The object was described as a bright red or blue fireball. It was first seen on the East Coast just outside of Syracuse. Things got even stranger when the object apparently landed at one point. An Air Force spokesman said the object was on the ground for about 42 minutes and that during this time a nearby power station mysteriously lost all power. As soon as the object took off again, the power was restored. The Air Force sent out jets which pursued it across the country. Then over the Mesquite Range in Nevada, the UFO exploded in a brilliant glare that was so bright it was visible over 5 states. What makes this case so incredible is the number of witnesses. Having crossed from the East Coast to the West Coast, the UFO was seen by thousands of people. But was it just a meteor, or was it something else? That whole part about it landing and then cutting off power, that's very strange. That has not been explained.
Number 5, Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber had written fiction for more than 40 years, and he said his writing streak was interrupted one night in the late 80s by an alien abduction in upstate New York. The alleged incident occurred on the night of December 26, 1985, as Whitley slept alone in his cabin in the woods. Woken by a strange noise, he saw a small non-human entity approaching his bed. Then suddenly it was morning. According to him, beings that he has since referred to as visitors entered his home and abducted him. Now, he also detailed another alien encounter that he claims took place in Toronto. Asleep in his Delta Chelsea hotel room in the middle of the night on June 6, 1998, Whitley claimed to have been visited by another mysterious stranger. I got up to open the door thinking it was a room service waiter. It was not. It was a man I described as about 5.5 feet tall, older looking, like someone in his 70s. He wore dark-colored clothing, a turtleneck, and charcoal slacks. He claimed the visitor stood motionless by the window for nearly an hour, expounding on the dangers of creating an intelligence more involved than its creator. He said it was the most extraordinary conversation I've ever had in my life. Number 4, Frederick Valentich. On October 21, 1978, Australian pilot Frederick Valentich disappeared into thin air. At 7:06 p.m., while at 4,500 feet, after departing, he reported that an unidentified craft was following him. Melbourne Flight Service insisted that there was no traffic near him, but the pilot was adamant. He explained that it had 4 bright lights and suddenly passed 1,000 feet above him at a remarkable speed. For 5 straight minutes, Frederick described its movements and shiny metallic exterior. Suddenly, he experienced engine trouble and said the aircraft was hovering and it's not an aircraft. Then they never heard from him again. The last sound radio officials heard was a metallic scraping sound. Now, authorities presume that he had crashed, but a later search of the area yielded nothing. In 2014, a UFO action group in Victoria alleged that a farmer observed a UFO nearly 90 feet in length hovering above his farm on the morning following Frederick's disappearance. The farmer also claimed that the pilot's plane was stuck to the UFO, leaking oil. But again, Frederick and the plane have never been found. Ultimately, a few possibilities regarding the disappearance of Frederick exist: that he crashed and his remains were never covered, that he purposely disappeared, or, of course, he was abducted by aliens. Number 3, Audrey and Debbie Hewins. Twins Audrey and Debbie Hewins said they were abducted by aliens. I was probably about 5 years old or so, said Audrey, and a bright blue light would come into the room and the door would open, and there would be like a foggy kind of misty blue light just shining through the whole house, and these 2 figures would come in. We have been up in crafts and seen our house from above. They're very good at mind erasing, or whatever you want to call it. They'll leave you with bits and pieces of things that you can remember. Debbie added, I remember one time being on a spaceship and standing there on the spaceship and the floor and the walls disappeared. They started doing all kinds of experiments on us when we were 12. While she was initially hesitant to come forward, Audrey claimed that after a non-human entity saved her life from drowning in the ocean, she was inspired to dedicate her life to openly discussing her alien abduction experiences. Number 2, Travis Walton. On November 5th, 1975, Travis Walton was abducted by aliens, and he didn't return for 5 whole days. Travis's abduction began after working at the Site Graves National Forest near Herbert, Arizona. Travis and a 6-man group of loggers were returning home when they allegedly spotted a shiny disc spanning 40 feet in diameter hovering in the sky above them. He said it was a metallic glowing disc making some very strange sounds. The closer I got to it, the more scared we all got, and they were swearing at me to get away from there, and when I got up close, it suddenly got louder and started to move. Travis then claimed that non-human beings abducted him and experimented on him until he fought them off. But as the being supposedly poked and prodded at him on a kind of table, 5 days elapsed on Earth where Walton was officially declared missing. I became conscious inside the craft, and I believe I was in the hospital. I was in a lot of pain, and as I became more conscious, I looked around and saw alien beings, and I just panicked. They were much smaller than me, and I think that's the reason why they gave up. Once they found out they couldn't control me, they split. Now, later research conducted at the site of Travis's abduction showed an unusual growth crate in the trees where the craft had allegedly hovered. The trees near the site were found to be producing wood fiber at a rate of 36 times greater than they had been in the decades before. And coming in number 1 is Dr. Albert Bender. One of the most famous instances of alien invasion was the case of Dr. Albert Bender. Albert was a very intelligent researcher with an interest in aliens and UFOs, and even founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau. It was successful as he began to gather lots of alleged evidence related to UFOs, but soon he began seeing strange men watching him around his town, reportedly with glowing eyes. Then one night in 1953, 3 men in black showed up to his house. The mysterious men looked at first to be government agents, but he soon discovered they were something from a completely different realm. The men made it clear to Albert that he was to immediately stop all UFO research and investigation and to cease any publishing. They then confiscated most of his findings before threatening him once more and vanishing. Then he had a second encounter where he was visited by 3 shadowy figures. They did not touch the floor but hovered above it, and they told him that their human appearance was an illusion and that whatever information he told people about their visitation would not be believed. They supposedly told him that they capture people from Earth and use their bodies to disguise themselves. Now, due to all this, Albert was so afraid of the experience that he immediately halted all publishings, quit ufology, and turned into a completely different man. Years later, he published a book about his experience with the men in black and went on to manage a motel and never touched extraterrestrial research ever again.
Now, how exactly did MJ12 get started? Well, for that, we gotta go all the way back to the Roswell incident. Just how many dots are we gonna be connecting in this video? I told you these guys are everywhere. So in July of 1947, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The military first reported it as a flying disc, and this news spread like wildfire. But soon after, the story was changed. They claimed it was now just a weather balloon. So why this quick switch up? Was it really just a weather balloon, or was something else going on? Well, according to some, there was 100% something else going on. There are a lot of people who think the government was hiding something big. They suspected that the military had actually recovered an alien spacecraft and possibly even alien bodies from that crash site. This theory got stronger over the years as more people, including supposed whistleblowers, came forward with their own stories. MJ12 is said to have spawned out of this Roswell incident, a secret group created by President Harry Truman. Story goes that the group was formed to manage and cover up all information about UFOs and extraterrestrials, particularly what was found at Roswell, and apparently they've been operating in the shadows ever since. But when did the rumors about MJ12 begin? I mean, if they're so top secret, how did word about them start spreading in the first place? Well, the origins of the Majestic 12 conspiracy go back to the 80s. So in 1984, a UFO researcher named Jamie Shendere got an envelope in the mail with some film inside. When he developed the film, it apparently showed 8 pages of documents that looked like they were briefing papers for something called Operation Majestic 12. These papers described a secret group of 12 people, the names of scientists, military leaders, and government officials. More on them later. Then on May 31st, 1987, a British UFO researcher named Timothy Good claimed that he had documents from the 50s that revealed a secret committee called Majestic 12. And these documents apparently detailed everything I just outlined. This group was formed in 1947 by an order from President Harry S. Truman. The documents said the committee's job was to cover up the crash of the alien spacecraft at Roswell in July of 47. So figure out how to use the alien technology they found and decide how the US should deal with extraterrestrial life in the future. Who are some of the big names that were said to be in Majestic 12 though? Vannevar Bush was a key figure during World War II. He was a brilliant engineer and inventor, probably most famous for his work on the infamous Manhattan Project. He also helped create the National Science Foundation and was an advisor to President Roosevelt and President Truman. His name shows up in the MJ12 documents and was allegedly part of the organization. If MJ12 is real, Bush's inclusion would make sense. I mean, he worked on the Manhattan Project. If he was helping to build a nuclear bomb, why wouldn't he be involved in top secret UFO research? James Forrestal was the first US Secretary of Defense, appointed in 1947. Before that, he was a Secretary of the Navy. He was heavily involved in the early Cold War period, and he had access to some of the most classified information. he would have been a logical choice for a group like MJ12. On top of that, there's always been some mystery as to the exact circumstances of his death in 1949, which some think may have had something to do with his involvement in MJ12. Roscoe H. Hillenkotter was the first director of the CIA, serving from 1947 to 1950. He later joined the board of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which is a civilian UFO research group. Makes sense why he'd be here. These are just a few of the names, of course. And now that we've dove into what this organization is, the history of it, who could have been involved, let's get into some of the criticism. We can't talk about Majestic 12 without mentioning the highly controversial Cutler-Twining memo. So I mentioned Jamie Chandere before, who'd received an envelope with photos of documents detailing MJ12. Well, just a year later in 1985, he and two other well-known UFOologists, Shanton T. Friedman and Bill Moore, had been on the hunt for declassified files in the National Archives when they apparently received a series of anonymous messages leading them to a very interesting document. The memo is a one-page document dated July 14, 1954. It was allegedly written by Robert Cutler, who was President Eisenhower's national security advisor, and addressed to General Nathan Twining. Twining was a high-ranking Air Force officer, which makes this memo a pretty big deal if it's real. The document briefly mentions MJ12 and talks about a meeting which some people think was related to UFOs and alien technology. People who believe in MJ12 and UFO cover-ups saw this as a major piece of proof that MJ12 was real and involved in hiding information about UFOs. Here's where it gets controversial though. There are several problems with this memo. First, there's no official record of a meeting on the date mentioned in the memo. Second, the style and format of the memo don't match the official documents from that time. Even the typeface used is apparently off. Another big issue is that Robert Cutler was actually out of the country on the date the memo was supposedly written. A lot of these arguments were brought forward by a UFO researcher and skeptic named Philip J. Klass and the FBI. But Klass was often labeled as a disinformation agent by conspiracy theorists. And again, even the FBI chimed in though. The FBI dug into the Cutler-Twining memo and other supposed MJ12 documents. They began their investigation in 1988 after receiving copies of these supposed documents. There were apparently discrepancies in the language and terminology that would have been used in a document like this. Another big issue was the content of the documents themselves. The FBI stated that the information seemed out of place. It seemed to be suspiciously tailored to fit the UFO conspiracy theories that were very popular in the 80s, rather than reflecting what would have been talked about at the time the documents were supposedly formed. It just seemed like someone had written them with modern UFO enthusiasts in mind, rather than being a genuine historical document. So in the end, the FBI declared the MJ12 documents to be falsified and wrote bogus on them with big bold letters. But did this really sway anyone who was highly skeptical of the government in the first place? Yeah, not really. And I mean, fair enough. It would make sense for an intelligence and security service organization like the FBI to cover up or downplay something like this. So, does MJ12 still exist? Did they ever exist at all? Well, they may or may not, but if the whole thing is fake, then how and why was this conspiracy concocted? Well, the first thought is that it's just UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists looking too deeply into things and spotting things that aren't really there, but there's another possibility. I mentioned the UFO researcher Bill Moore earlier, who was one of the big names involved in the unearthing of these supposed MJ12 documents. Well, he actually started changing his tune about this whole thing. Moore thought that the government was covering something up. It just may have not been aliens, unfortunately. Instead, he thinks the whole thing was drummed up by the United States government as part of a mass disinformation campaign. The purpose? To distract the public from top secret Air Force projects that were really going on. It makes sense. People would get so excited by the idea that the government was interacting with extraterrestrials that they'd be totally blind to the actual nefarious stuff the government was working on. But there's another aspect to this theory as well. What if the disinformation campaign was formed by the government in order to lessen people's interest in aliens and UFOs. What do I mean by this? Well, think about it. The government creates the documents, lets the public obsess over them, then discredits them to make the whole topic of UFOs look silly. Purpose of this? UFOs and aliens really are existing and they just don't want the public to be focusing on it. Hey, who knows? With all that said though, what do you think about this whole MJ12 thing? Leave your thoughts and comments down below. I've been your host James and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.